Hello everyone, this is your friend and I am back with a new fanfic part 3. The fanfic title is What If Konan Died Then Reincarnated into a New World part 3. I hope you enjoy this fanfic, and if you enjoy this, so don't forget to subscribe my channel. Now let's start the fanfic. Sasori's gaze was already fixed on the door, waiting. Konan was still peering through the doorway as he began to ask, "How is Didera?" She finished stepping through and turned to him. "Didera will be fine. Just some unforeseen incompatibility." She glanced at Hidan. "I may have miscalculated you all." Hidan bristled. "You mean you expected everyone to be a bunch of homicidal weirdos?" Konan stared at him. Did Hidan just say that? She was unable to think of a response. Hidan opened his mouth to say more, but stopped at the last moment and forced himself to look at her with more intensity. The scrutiny was almost worse. She looked around to see how everyone else was taking the news, and regretted it immediately, for they had varying expressions on their faces, all slightly different versions of the same look Hidan had. This scrutiny was definitely worse. For the first time it was plainly obvious, almost tangible on her fingertips, what and who they weren't. A room full of horrified, judgmental, defensive strangers stared at her. For the first time Konan thought she might understand a little bit of the loneliness that boy who looked much like Yahiko, Naruto, had lived through. Most of the eyes looking on her were a little angry, yes, especially Sasori, since it was her claims that had driven Didera out of the room, but the anger was nothing more than a glint. Her skin crawled, her mouth dried. The dominant expression she could see was offense. Over half of them looked offended by her. Baffled by her existence, insulted by her perfectly normal and descriptive words, they looked at her as if utterly unable to fit her into their idea of a human. Several of them looked fearful. But she had never hurt them. Not intentionally. Not to cause harm, to help. But it was more than clear that in this moment, no one saw her existence as helpful. Somehow, as she tried not to shrink away and wondered what she could do or say to prove her intention, it got even worse. The remaining less than half who had not taken her words with horror looked at her with eyes filled with pity, instead. Pity? For me. Because I missed something. I didn't know better. What do they think I am? I hate being pitied. Bastards. Cut them down. Defend. The desire to kill overcame her. The blazing hot feeling speared through all her insides, urging her to let it escape, to show them how utterly strong and pitiless she truly was. She was horrified. Konan could not think, could not do anything except stay still, stay silent in the hopes that none of them had noticed. Because the truth was, they were right to look at her this way. Was she human? She could not remember what being human meant. Jiraiya-sensei had something about that a long time ago, but she had helped kill him. I killed my own teacher, almost surrogate father. I didn't think much of it. Without thinking now, she turned to Hidan. He had been angry before, but she could see traces of pity in his eyes now. She didn't even know how she knew what pity looked like in his eyes. He looked in her eyes, trying to figure out what she was. But hadn't he always known what she was? What did I do? No one was willing to step forward and give her an answer. Maybe I didn't do anything. Hidan could see what she was, always had been able to. But now not even he knew what to think of her. She was shamed, and humiliated, and could find no way out. Not one of them was what she thought they were. Not one. "Hey," Yahiko whispered. "That's okay, I guess. I can forgive that. Whatever we were back where you come from, it's okay." Are you okay?" he asked, as the sound of his voice and his footsteps moving towards her came to a stop just a couple feet away. Konan. She was on the roof. Konan looked to her side, but he was no longer there. On further reflection, she did feel as though some time had passed. It must have been hearing his gentle, deep voice utter her name. She stepped over a bit of crumbling brick and settled into a crumbled corner of the roof. It made a good place to be alone. Although it didn't make a difference, not really. By now she could have been alone in any place in the building whatsoever. The wind made some sound as it passed, not touching any part of her. The worst part was, she felt better already. It makes sense, in a way. I was always alone. At least here it's acknowledged. She surveyed the land from her secure perch. It rustled with living things. That was good. Though she had never had one, Somehow she missed having a hunting partner. The wind again ped in front of her, ignorant of her existence. She missed it. Missed what? Something unimaginable. So she closed her eyes and rested. General. Yahiko reached out to hold empty air as she whirled and ran from the room. His hand hovered there in the air for a few seconds, disbelieving. Wait, I didn't mean anything. I was only trying to help. He took his hand back as it sank in that she really wasn't coming back. What did I do? He wanted to look in her eyes, see what was in there. Just once. Just to prove she could trust him too. Maybe I didn't do anything. Hidan twitched over his whole body and exclaimed, "What?" He looked around. Oh, shit. I just forgot where I was for a second there. Like a blackout or something. He looked at Yahiko. Probably you shouldn't just walk up to her like that, dude. Yahiko looked down and retreated back to the edge of the circle. You don't say. The reason he'd come was to help her, like he wanted to help people in general. Was that not enough? She had said he was barely capable of being a ninja in the first place, after all. Perhaps helping people really wasn't enough. Hidan shut his eyes tight, tried to sort himself out. It was so hard, with so many people around. Even locating himself was impossible. He grew frustrated. Okay. That was it. She didn't. That felt just way too shitty to put up with, all you holes staring like that. Are we? No, is she like some kind of monster or something? There was that. Nagato stammered. It wasn't her, exactly. It was just that, all we asked for was what abilities we had as ninjas and what we were capable of. That's all we asked for, and instead she told us how we used to kill people and how good we were at it. He looked at his hands again. I get that ninjas are a kind of person that fights, but I don't want to pull out souls or anything. Firing missiles. I thought, when she said we used to be ninjas, that it would be something. He looked around and gestured helplessly. Something a little more like that trick she did with the paper butterflies. Which sounds really dumb now that I say it, actually. Perhaps that was all she had to share, Itachi murmured. Kisame shook his head. No, she did tell us what our originals were like in the process. Enemy this, enemy that. Even I don't think of the world like that. It was like she was using that word to mean everyone that's not us. Who does she think of as an enemy? Are we close to being on that list? Hidan shook his head, still trying to get himself in order. No, that, I didn't get any weird signals or anything while she was talking, just some other shit. Maybe thinking like that is just normal where she comes from. Sasori's tone of voice was even, level, a proclamation of undiluted truth. I don't want to become any more like a world where that's normal. I won't let anyone put up with that. He had nothing more to say beyond that. Everyone who mattered knew that he fixed things. Built things. It was a waste to him to do otherwise. And of course Deidara didn't need any more stress in his life. Sasori heard his own voice from years ago echo with advice just as wise as it had always been. Kakuzu leaned back against the wall. If my opinion matters to any of you kids, I'd like to point out that I don't disagree with what she said. He looked up to meet everyone else's gaze. It is accurate to say that people always have a motive for what they do. In our world, it's only to get your money or your vote. In her world it's to kill you. I dislike the gruesomeness of that, but the concept is the same. There really isn't much difference to be horrified about. It only seems like it. Yahiko looked up at him with a desperate tone in his voice. No, that's not true. Kakuzu did not think this was the time to let children down gently. My point proven. Even for the defense of his friend, Nagato's words failed him. He looked between Yahiko and Kakuzu. He doesn't get to say things like that. Not to Yahiko. Anger rose in him. You know what? I don't give a. Yahiko turned in shock. Nagato continued, heedless. My original could be anything. He could be firing ICBMs, kidnapping the last rhinos for his collection, pulling out souls left, right and center. I don't give a. I didn't come here to do anything like that. I'm not going to do anything like that, and neither is Yahiko. Keep nattering on if you want to, but we came here to make a woman who couldn't even look at us without pain feel just a little better, and that's what we're going to do. He turned to Yahiko, unstoppable. That is how she looked at us. I saw it while you were looking at the paper. I didn't want her to look like that. I'm going to look for her. Well, it probably is a bad idea, but come anyway. Just get out of here. Hidan piped up. Count me in. I'm all about people who need someone to talk to. That's my literal job. Itachi frowned and opened his eyes. He was done thinking. I believe most of us are overreacting. She did tell us what we might be capable of. She never said we must use these abilities for the same reasons our originals did. I think we are free to make our own choices. Sasori's eyes moved to the left to look at him. Yes, blowing up people with spiders is a highly adaptable talent that can be used for all matter of things that definitely won't get us in trouble with every law enforcement agency there is. Itachi looked puzzled. You have even less of a case than Nagato does. Missiles, for example, cannot be used for anything but death and destruction. However, Deidara's power is to make semi-living, useful beings out of nothing more than clay. It's his own explosive chakra. Most likely he could choose when or if to detonate them. And the only talents you have inherited are the ability to build complicated structures and control them precisely. Explain to me how your original sins mean that you can only choose to use that for evil. Sasori's eyes moved away from Itachi's face. I'm going to go find Deidara. With that, he left. Kisame looked sideways at Itachi. These aren't just abilities she asked us to learn about, Itachi. This is a thing she asked us to be. Konan seems pretty determined that we be ninjas and learn more about what that means. If this is what it means to be a ninja. Itachi nodded. I understand what you mean, and I agree with you. But perhaps we shouldn't be so hasty. If that is what she demands, it is unfortunate. But I don't think she is that unreasonable. She did admit she has misestimated what we are capable of. Let's have a discussion about what can be expected of us and what can't first. I would still like to learn what illusions can be used for. Nagato had been following Itachi's arguments with rising hope. Now he smiled eagerly. I agree. It's sad to hear that I used to be like that, and it scares me to think I'm capable of doing anything so drastic as murder. I guess I can't look to other me for answers to what I am, after all. But that makes me curious too, just how did I manage to get like this from being like that? He looked out the door. Either way, I'm not doing any good for anyone in here. Yahiko's first instinct was to follow, like usual, but this time he hesitated. I won't be able to do anything. She hates me. But as he looked at Nagato's back, he saw the strength in it. Who cares? It's what I do. Even if I really can't do anything, I never want to be anything other than what I am now. I'm the sort of person that helps people. Including the ones that hate me. Hidan smiled back at him in response, and they left the room together. Once in the hallway, Nagato stopped. He looked to the lobby, but didn't move. The lobby would be lit at this time of day, and he didn't think she'd be there waiting for them this time. He turned to Hidan. You had some discussion with her last night, got to know her a little more than anyone else. Do you have an idea where she might be? Hidan scratched at his head and focused for a moment or two. She was probably still feeling what she'd been feeling just a few minutes ago, which meant that if she was nearby he should be able to feel it. He did not. He could have focused more to expand his field of view, but didn't bother. The fact that she wasn't anywhere in a radius of several rooms was more than enough information. Nagato was right. He had gotten some sense of what she was like last night. She seemed a little similar to himself, somehow. Hidan didn't know how or why he thought that, but would never consider doubting his instincts. He smirked and said, well, I know where I would be if I wanted to be alone. He then led them at a pace they had to run several times to keep up with to the stairwell, up to the second floor, and over to the second floor's cross hallway which had in place of the kitchen some maintenance areas. Here there was access to the roof. He remarked that he hadn't used the stairs before so they were probably very dusty, but he figured they would like actual stairs better than the method he used to get up to the roof. Neither of them was willing to guess what that method may be and agreed they would. It turned out the door was more disused than they'd thought. Hidan tried the handle, but the handle itself seemed almost gummed in position. When he finally succeeded in turning the stubborn mule of a thing, the door itself was even worse. The handle was too small for anyone else to east, and when he let go, the string of curses ready to leave his mouth in vehemence at the little object were cut short by the observation that the handle stayed twisted. Yahiko could not help but laugh at this. Nagato had to admit it was pretty funny. Hidan felt a little humored from their influence, but kept himself sober and waited for them to stop. When they finished, he rubbed his hands together gleefully and chirped, "So, who wants to turn this obnoxious shit to splinters?" Yahiko wondered, "If you're so happy, why don't you do it?" Hidan glared at him with a surge of ferocity. "You think I'm going to dull my beautiful precious on ing wood? Besides, chopping through it would be disappointing. That's nothing like the reducing to splinters that I asked for." Nagato's brow furrowed as he tried listing things on his fingers. "Animals? No. Missiles? Hell no. Dead bodies? I'm not even. No. That was a really long list," she said. "Give me a few minutes." After about a minute and a half of watching his facial expressions change as he worked his memory back through the list of things Konan had claimed his original could do, Yahiko and Hidan were rewarded with a lightbulb expression and Nagato muttering, "Oh, yeah, that could work. You guys, get out of the way." They did as requested, scattering to either side of the door and moving to the other side of the hall, just to be safe. Hidan began to bounce up and down on his toes, clenching his fists in front of him and prepared to do that same combination of sounds he had made the previous night. Yahiko felt like SpongeBob in one episode where SpongeBob had started chewing through his arms like popcorn in anticipation of something. Could they really do it? Could any of them really use jutsu, do all these fantastical things? It was time for the truth of what they were to come out. Nagato's mouth dried. As he reached out and spread his hands a few inches from the door, he grasped the enormity of what he was about to try. It was one thing to think that he could be capable of so much more than he'd ever dreamed. It would be another to really prove it. The performance anxiety was huge. He knew that his friends must also understand the importance of this. Slowly, to calm his racing heart, he closed his eyes and took slow breaths. It should be instinct, Nagato. Doing what you've supposedly done so many times before should be easy, muscle memory. Relax and let yourself go. He looked at his hands, those ordinary-looking hands. It was unbelievable. Nothing about this felt easy or instinctual. He began to panic, thinking that he would surely make a fool of himself in front of everyone. No, I'm just psyching myself out. I just need to stop thinking. My mind is getting in my way. He grit his teeth and closed his hands, just a little, not enough for any of his fingers to meet. Stop thinking. Stop thinking. Stop thinking. Just pull. His fingers shot out from his palm. Yahiko jumped and bit down as if he did have his arms in his mouth like popcorn. Hidan jumped and gasped as the air around them shifted in a way that dazzled his senses, heightened as they were. Nagato gasped as he became aware for the first time of a current inside him, which now jumped its banks and surged inward. The portion of it that was in his hands really did seem to act on its own, changing in some way instantly. There was a great cracking sound, and they all feared for the structural integrity of the building around them. The cracking proceeded to shattering, and from there to screaming. The hinges alone had Nagato cringing, and Hidan and Yahiko covering their ears. The only part of the door not making noises no door should ever make was the frame, which had had more than enough of this. The hinges were too jammed to break. The metal plates holding each one were too solidly attached. The wooden frame the plates were attached to had none of these defects, and with a whoosh sizable chunks of the wall came loose and flew towards Nagato. The door itself had also had none of these defects, and the hinge side had splintered loose. Before he could even process the danger, Nagato found the rest of the door in between him and the loose metal plates. His elbows unlocked and folded close to his body, the door coming to a rest against his palms and the loose hinges slamming into it on the other side. For a moment, the scene was frozen like this, Nagato staring wide-eyed at the door only inches from his nose, his palms still spread, the door and the hinges refusing the orders of gravity. Yahiko gaping in awe from his position behind Nagato and to the left, his eyes still not having gotten around to sending the signals of Nagato turning and blocking the hinges with the door. Hidan grinning without knowing he was grinning, staring at the splinters flying harmlessly out to the side and flaking off the ruined edge of the door like brown pointy snow. Then the scene abruptly unfroze as instinct kicked into gear. Nagato's hands and the chakra inside them relaxed and the hallway echoed with the thud of wood crashing onto wood and metal bouncing off both. The signal was sent and Yahiko's brain began to process this blur of information. Hidan followed the door all the way to the ground, his head turning almost robotically. As his hands relaxed, Nagato's mind did too and information could finally flow freely. In just a few seconds he understood what he had done. His breath trembled in shocked laughter and a small disbelieving smile spread over his face. He turned to his friends and saw them there, utterly real, and the smile grew into a broad open-mouthed expression of joy. I did it. I pulled, and, right out of the frame. Took chunks right out of the frame. Yahiko met his eyes. The hinges. Hidan proceeded to do exactly the bouncing, shaking his fists, warbling, chirping, squealing expression of joy he'd done the previous night, except at a higher volume. It lasted for a good 5 seconds, after which he wavered on his feet and turned to Nagato with eyes partially glazed over. That was so amazing. You, come here. And Nagato found himself lifted bodily off the floor again as Hidan grabbed him and stumbled backward. Not even hitting the wall behind him stopped either of them from smiling like loons this time. Yahiko joined in from the side, and Nagato closed his eyes, soothed beyond measure by these two men holding him in their arms. All too soon, Yahiko stepped back and the embrace came to an end. Hidan released Nagato with a grin, and they moved simultaneously to gather around the door where it lay. Hidan knelt down to make sure it was real, and picked up the hinges. With plates and chunks of doorframe attached, they were pretty heavy. He looked up at Nagato and lifted them up and down. Amazing. You know, I don't feel at all mad at your original if that, he motioned to the visible dents in the door, is what he left for Ya. I could forgive him everything right now, or anybody else, even Stalin. So. He shook his head in wonder. Yahiko nodded. Nagato, you just did, a miracle of some kind. Magic. Space magic. Nagato looked up. Space. Yahiko started gesturing randomly, trying to reach for the words. Yeah, not like outer space, more like, the space, between things. Push and pull, right. You can mess around with things at a distance like there wasn't a distance. He laughed again, satisfied with his words this time. Why yes, space magic, Nagato stammered. That makes perfect sense. But wait, if I can, then Konan, oh my baby Jesus, she was right. You can, too, and Hidan, he spun to face Hidan, and stopped. Did Konan say something about immortality earlier? Hidan's eyes lit up like a fireworks show. Yeah, she did. I can. He turned to the doorway, to the goal of Nagato's action. Konan. She was feeling bad. Shit. We bring this to her, and there's no way anyone can feel bad. Yahiko gasped in horror. Oh no, I forgot about her. I can't believe I did that. You're completely right. Let's go. He plunged into the adequately lit stairway without hesitation. Hidan knelt back down and placed the loose hinges in the dents they had made, and he and Nagato followed. Konan. She was growing restless. It was not in her nature to be still, only sitting and brooding for long periods of time. The injured feeling of rejection, of humiliation, of being so alien in settings so familiar, all were now consumed by the pulse beneath her skin. It was hot, and sharp, and consumed even her own fear of it. Someone had to be wrong. Was it them, those strangers who did such a poor imitation of her family, lovers and co-workers, or was it her, the lost, helpless intruder in a land that rightfully belonged to the strangers? There was no doubt that someone was wrong. The bafflement and horror in their eyes had more than confirmed that. She tried to calm herself, be tactful about this. No, I have brought them together, told them of their past, promised to teach them. That is my purpose. Even if they reject me, even if they hate me, I made a promise to be there. I must try again. Go back down, see if cooler heads have prevailed. Try a different approach. Apologize. Be reasonable about this. Yet, as she forced these thoughts through, her hands gripped the crumbling brick beneath her. Digging in, her senses told her of a wild mountain whose cliffs were hers alone to master. They told her of approaching rain. Her inner senses told her of battle, of bloodshed and death and fury, and every time they told her of the blood a vision came to her. It was a short vision. It was Yahiko rushing forward, his heart pierced by one of many very, very ordinary kunai. The vision would not stop coming. She tried imagining anything she could think of, up to and including the fabric of reality itself dissolving, in an attempt to get this state her mind was stuck in to do likewise. Are you okay, Konan? She had been wrong. Out of all of them, there was one who was just as she had known him. She could almost feel his blood spilling. He rushed forward. No, he was trying to save me. That's not. Did he hear me? Her blood boiled red hot with fury. She could feel his blood spilling from each little scratch of her nails. A growl started low in her throat. There was a change. Her senses told her of something different approaching, something that moved swiftly like the wind. Only this could break through her vision, and it did. Her blood cooled to far below its normal temperature. What was I just thinking of? Did I just now want to hurt him? How could I ever want such a thing? She felt sick. It didn't make any sense. He was just like her Yahiko, the man she had always wanted to be right beside. Wanting to hurt him was the same as wanting to hurt her Yahiko. And she had never wanted that, she had never wanted to see him hurt by anyone. There was no way she could want that. And yet her own thoughts had been clear as speech. Konan tried to think of anything else, shoved that aside. Thank the gods for that swift moving sound. As it approached the ruined portion of the roof, Konan was able to focus on someone completely different. It helped that he spoke. Hey, Konan, some completely cool shit just happened. Several seconds passed between that announcement and the feeling of someone coming up close behind her. In between, his tread slowed, and there was a pause between when he stopped and when he knelt down just over her shoulder. After some hesitation, a hand closed firmly on her shoulder. She smiled. She had not reacted to the first sounds, of course, because there was no need to. She could never mistake this man for another. The look she recalled in his eyes turned her smile bittersweet. Even so, she reached up and touched his hand. Thank you. Hidan paused. Why was she thanking him? The pain and anger, this new bittersweetness, he didn't think his arrival had done anything worth thanks. Regardless, he shook his head. It was true, her feelings had distracted him from his own almost immediately. The triumph was fading fast. That was why he refocused now, to tell her as soon as possible. Hey Konan, we did it. What you said, we proved it. You were right. We're super glad you told all of us about this awesome shit. It feels amazing. Konan's eyes widened. Her fingers tightened on his hand, which was already doing wonders to soothe her, and she turned to face him. He grinned. We did it. Nagato and Yahiko and I, we were worried about you, so we came up here, but the door to the stairs was jammed shut. He looked up over his shoulder. What did that feel like? Nagato came up and stood over her. Unlike Hidan, he had no limits to his joy. His face was flushed, his cheeks stretched in a smile she hadn't seen for a very long time, and his eyes shone. The door was too stuck to open, so I thought of what you said. I remembered you said my original could push and pull things. Well, it turns out, he was shaking with joy, I can too. He looked at Hidan, who was captivated. I felt it, this chakra she told us about. I felt it inside me, and it felt so powerful. Most of it pulled, and the chakra in my hands changed somehow, and it happened. Just like that, a little change inside me and the door was cracking and squealing and it actually broke near the hinges just as they pulled free and I moved so quickly, I didn't even know I'd done it until later, and I put the door in between me and them. They dented it. The hinges didn't break, they pulled out of the frame. I took chunks of wood out of the doorframe itself. He looked at his hands, held them out for Hidan and Konan to see. I pulled a door out of its frame like it was nothing. Nagato's breath shook like he was going to break out in amazed laughter again. He sat down in front of Konan's turned head, just behind Hidan. I didn't care. I was upset about being told I was a murderer in a past life, yes, but that doesn't mean I can stand to hurt someone now. I didn't care about anything before, I just wanted to be who I am in this world and help you, and now I don't have any words for how happy I am that I did. No one's really angry at you, it's just that hearing you talk about us like you expect us to be people we barely recognize was upsetting. We're not our originals. We belong to this world, and this portion of this world is nothing whatsoever like you seem to expect. You can't expect us to be anything like who you knew. With a smile, he held out a hand. It was still good though, to realize I was capable of something I didn't think anyone could be capable of. Can you tell me more? A strange feeling came up inside Konan, a warmth to wash away all worries, all thoughts. She looked into her brother's eye, saw the sheer happiness that she hadn't seen for many years, and took his hand. They stood up together. Nagato was sincerely happy to see her, and Hidan next to her held her hand. For a moment, all was right. It was a beautiful moment. Then she saw movement all the way over to the left, where she had not looked since Hidan had put his hand on her left shoulder. Her grip loosened instantly and a bolt of pain went through her. Yahiko was the first to forgive me. He always will be. He'd continue to smile at me no matter what, wouldn't he? Support me. Save me. She saw him crumble to the ground again, sliding off Nagato's shoulder and down onto the dirt. The warmth began to boil again. Konan fought to keep her gaze on Nagato, to keep herself from looking away. She might never be able to look at her former lover without pain again, but the least she owed him was not avoiding him. Nagato's smile disappeared, and he held onto her other hand with a stronger grip. Why? Her eyes slipped off him, moving the faint trace of orange out of her field of view. Sharp, hot pain filled her every nerve. Why is he so much like his original? His original died because of how he was. Yahiko, you deserve better than that. You shouldn't. She realized then that she had outgrown Yahiko. Perhaps Nagato hadn't, but the way Yahiko could just forgive and forgive, over and over, die, as if it was all the easiest thing in the world, all of this pissed her straight off now. You don't have the right to do any of those things, Yahiko. And yet, the way he could, over and over as if it were easy, in a world awash with nations and people helpless to stop the endless cycle of their own anger, was awesome and intolerable. Absolutely intolerable. It could not have been difficult to see the change in her eyes. Nagato's joyous feeling had long since been replaced with fear and worry. Konan, I will go see how the others are doing. See if they agree with you in the slightest. Her hand slipped out of his own without any resistance, although he held as tight as he dared. Only the disturbance of the air around him marked her ping, so quick he had barely seen it. Hidan was shaking with every feeling a human could have, most of them hurting him since everyone's positive feelings had disappeared rapidly over the last minute or so. Nagato stood shocked still with his mouth still open. The way she had looked at him had been so good, they had been so happy, and then she saw Yahiko. He had a terrible feeling something was very wrong, too wrong for him to hope of solving. He looked at Yahiko, who had a sad expression on his face. Yahiko turned a little red as he saw Nagato looking, and shrunk a little into himself. He had done that before, after Konan said his original was not mentally fit enough to be a ninja. Nagato's hands began to tighten into fists, ready to defend his Yahiko by any means necessary. But then he remembered the feeling from only a few minutes before, how ready to forgive he had been, and relaxed his hands by force. Yahiko would not want to be defended with anger. For his sake, Nagato's ability to forgive would have to be exercised more extremely than it had ever been before. He swore on his newly used power that he would do it, even if he wasn't able to. Especially if he wasn't able to. He turned to Hidan, who nodded. With Konan's influence gone, Hidan was much more clearly headed, so they both got up and walked over to Yahiko. Yahiko looked up at them, hurt and confused. He asked Hidan, why does she hate me? Hidan tried to find something more to say, some softer way, but couldn't. You hurt, dude. You hurt a lot. Yahiko looked down and came to a decision. Hidan, I trust you. Will you help her? Both their mouths fell open. This was extreme measures. Hidan and Nagato looked at each other. Nagato gestured for him to go on. So Hidan kneeled down in front of where Yahiko was sitting and said, I promise. I'll talk with her way past my bedtime for as long as I need to. I'll stay right next to her. I'll get her a movie or shit if she needs something. I'll do whatever I can to help her. Sure as shit, sunshine. Yahiko smiled at him. Thank you. I've never made someone feel bad just by existing before. I don't have any idea what it could possibly be. But don't worry about me, worry about her. If she ever does want to see me, let her. I'll be fine. He looked Nagato in the eye. Really? Neither of them liked the idea of that, so they maintained careful silence. Thankfully he hadn't asked for a promise. They stood up, with Yahiko looking much restored if disappointed. They started the slow walk back to the stairs down. After a few steps, Yahiko paused in mid-stride for a moment. Wait, when did I become sunshine? As he had done many times before in a very different area of the earth, Deidara paused in mid-step. One leg remained bent off the floor, only beginning to slowly lower after no more was heard for several seconds. Sasori had stopped too and was looking up. Dei did not notice. His mind was too busy racing. Calm down, Dei. Calm down, yeah. This is not a place where you have a reason to be freaking out. That couldn't have been what it sounded like. Everyone here's peaceful. Well, everyone except Konan. Did she head upstairs? What could she be doing up there? Are we in trouble? Where's the enemy? Where's the danger? Do we need to get out of here or stay and fight? I'm unarmed. Shit. She. Deidara. That and a violent jerk on his elbow broke off this less than helpful train of thought. Deidara realized he had tensed up everywhere and failed to notice Sasori moving directly in front of him. The track of his thoughts must have been very visible. He forced himself to take a deep breath and relax. Sasori watched him carefully as his breathing slowed down and returned to normal. His complexion did too. And yet, Deidara could not get his muscles to fully untense, and he discovered a sudden desire not to continue the way they had been going. Sasori sighed lightly, patiently, and pulled on Dei's elbow again. Nothing to be gained standing here. Let's go see what that was. Deidara nodded vigorously at this course of action, and motioned down the long hallways to where he guessed the stairs had to be. They set off. Upon climbing the stairs and retracing their steps through the second floor, which proved to have nearly the same layout as the lower floor, except it had more living spaces where the lower floor had functional rooms, they came to the exact spot they had just been standing below. That was where the sound seemed to have come from as far as either of them could tell. Deidara had been sitting on the bed, thinking of Konan's words and wondering if he really wanted to stay when Sasori showed up. Sasori had seemed as close to resentful, angry and yet confused that Deidara had ever seen him. They had sat together on the bed, and Sasori had asked Deidara a single question. After talking in low solemn voices about the meanings and consequences of Deidara's answer, Sasori seemed to be mostly resolved. At that point they had left the room and Sasori had mentioned that he would prefer to leave this place and think some more somewhere else. So they had been heading toward the front lobby not far from Deidara's room when the sound happened. Deidara stopped almost immediately upon seeing the ruined doorway in the cross hallway. Sasori followed his gaze and froze. Deidara quickly and silently raised his hand and gestured forward. They approached the door, Sasori following as quietly as he could. Dei looked into the room beyond the doorway, which was still relatively dark even with the door to the roof open at the other end. Nobody was in there. He guessed somebody had been going up to the roof, and he could think of no reason to expect it was anyone bad since the only people in the building at the moment were friendly. Sasori was lightly tracing his hand along the splintered edge of the door, looking between it and the remains of the frame. His mouth was slightly open. He moved the hinges aside, saw the perfectly fitting dents in the door beneath them. His mouth fell even more open and he shifted the hunks of metal and wood to one hand so he could trace the dents with his other, make sure they were real. His light, cautious fingers rubbed against some fractured wood fibers that could easily have become splinters if he'd pressed harder. It was real. Sasori looked up at Deidara and shook his head. He had no idea what was going on here. Deidara turned to the frame he was standing next to. It looks like those might have been ripped out of here maybe. Before he even finished speaking, Sasori was next to him, carefully holding one rusty, splintery chunk as he pressed the other into the top gap in the frame. It didn't quite fit there, but it perfectly matched the bottom. Sasori nodded his head, still unable to speak. If he had been able to, he would have congratulated Deidara on his use of the word, ripped. That was the only kind of force he could imagine causing damage like this. But what kind of anything could possibly rip a door out of its frame, never mind the hinges themselves? He turned around quick enough to make Dei jump back several steps, glanced around all edges of the door. But no, there was no sign of crushing like there should have been if someone or something of unusual strength had gripped it. His mouth starting to get very dry now, he made some effort to close it. Still it dried. What the hell had happened here? Steps sounded behind them. There had been little to say after recognizing Itachi's wisdom, and no one had been so much as scuffling their feet along the carpeted floor at the time of the screeching. The clay animator and the puppet master stepped back against the side of the door to make room as the hallway filled with curious and wary ninjas. You guys have any idea what happened? Kisame asked. Sasori decided to buck up, explain it himself. Well, I have no idea what exactly happened here. Whatever it was ripped out the door and the hinges. Hinges don't pull off nearly as easily as a door would, so that's probably what splintered it. Somehow, the hinges slammed into the door. They ripped out chunks of the frame too. I'm a little afraid to ask what, why or how this happened. Deidara mentioned, the hinges look gunked up to me, and the other doors open. The why is probably just so they could get to the roof. Kakuzu raised an eyebrow. I don't think the two of us, he motioned to Kisame, combined could pull a door out of a wall. Let's not even talk about those things. Itachi nodded and turned to Sasori, asked to look at the hinges. Sasori handed them to him. Itachi looked at them very carefully, trying to imagine the scene as he did so. The motion of the door, the wood splintering, he narrowed his eyes and tried to focus even more. Suddenly something happened. It was like a pulse of blood raced to his face, only it wasn't blood but rather pure warmth. He suddenly found himself imagining the door being pulled out of its frame in very vivid detail, so much so he could almost literally see it. Sasori's explanation was correct. He looked up at the other men in the hallway and had to stop his mouth from falling open. Kakuzu's body shifted just a little, and Itachi saw him turn and look in his direction before it happened. He could make out every little movement, even the little twitches that most of them suppressed at the sight of him. He lost focus and it disappeared, the amount of detail he could make out from them returning to normal. The hinges dangled from his arms limp at his sides, forgotten. Kisame remained tense even after whatever it was went away, the shark man's eyes staying wide. Itachi, your eyes, they turned red, with a little black circle around your pupil, and the circle looked like it had 3 commas in it. Itachi tried to imagine this, for once silenced not by his own choice. He raised a hand to his eyes, traced the skin under them. He looked around at everyone, this time looking for something. Deidara guessed what it was and handed him a small mirror. Itachi looked into the mirror and imagined the feeling of the warmth around his eyes, focused again. It worked. He gaped at eyes that matched exactly what Kisame described. Somehow his perfectly normal eyes had turned red, with the black line appearing and the 3 commas spinning into place. It felt, he looked up at everyone else, maintaining his focus this time. It felt good. He let it go willingly for everyone else's comfort. Kakuzu narrowed his own seriously abnormal eyes. So it seemed the Uchiha, unlike himself and Nagato, could bring out his abnormal eyes and send them away anytime he wished. Kakuzu wondered what mechanism could possibly be responsible for that. People didn't just spontaneously change eye color, and red wasn't on the list of possible human eye colors in the first place. To say nothing of such a precise pattern. What kind of mechanism could make that possible? Did his eyes have the color-changing cells of squid or octopus? But what purpose would that serve? Before he could ask Itachi exactly what those eyes did, the sound of footsteps echoed from the doorway. They were soft footsteps, and several of the group who had first encountered her in a loud place or with her standing still realized for the first time just how silent Konan's way of walking was. Only the enclosed space of the stairs made the sound noticeable. Deidara shuffled aside to leave room between himself and Sasori. He would have shuffled even farther aside, had he not felt reluctant to leave everyone else's company. The air around Konan seemed to be filled with rotating blades, a heated and forceful of air that frightened almost everyone there. Nobody needed any indicators to know she was not in the mood for putting up with anyone else's concerns. She stopped in the doorway between Deidara and Sasori. Her face wore no expression in particular and she looked down at the door with its splintered edge and dented wood, then sideways at the maze of metal and wood that Itachi still held. She moved as if to step over it and continue on her way, then stopped. After a quick glance and a twitch of her ear found nothing behind her, Konan sighed and lifted the unsplintered edge of the door. She appeared to be checking how thick it was. After a moment she continued to lift that edge all the way up, put her other hand carefully on the splintered edge, and lifted the entire thing easily. It was wide enough she needed one hand on the bottom and one on the top to carry it, but otherwise there were no signs of difficulty in the way she moved and carried it down the hallway. Her steps were still very quiet as she disappeared around the corner. Damn, what happened? Deidara murmured. What? He asked again as he saw Sasori look at him. There's definitely something going on with her, yeah. She kinda hinted when we talked that she's seen some things, yeah. Sasori turned away and shook his head, unwilling and unprepared to vocalize his thoughts about her just yet. More footsteps echoed from the door to the roof. Nagato, Yahiko and Hidan seemed a strange mixture of downcast and hopeful when they came through. Yahiko smiled as he usually did when he saw everyone else gathered. Nagato and Hidan appeared to have been discussing something of importance, but stopped midway behind Yahiko. Hidan rushed forward into the hallway, looking puzzled as he walked through the space where the door had been. Nagato stood by Yahiko's side as they both grinned, an example of genuine overwhelming joy rapidly growing in intensity on Nagato's face. He nodded at Yahiko. Yahiko was similarly unable to restrain his smile. This only worsened his problems with figuring out how to start speaking, but he didn't mind. Hey guys. So, where did the door go? Kakuzu snorted. Konan took it. She checked its thickness first. It's almost definitely going to a training room. It's not useful as a door anymore, now it's just convenient wood. Yahiko nodded. That's good, that it'll still be around to look at. I don't mean to be too sentimental, but it is the first real thing that shows that we really are ninja and can do the magic things she talked about. He turned to Nagato. Come on, tell us what it was like. Oh, shit yeah, Hidan piped up. All I've got for ninja stuff is things that aren't magic, so I don't get to know for myself. I need to hear this shit. Okay, Nagato managed to force out through a smile that wouldn't go away. It was amazing. So we couldn't get through this door when it was here because it was too jammed to open, and Hidan suggested. As Nagato described the entire incident, going into special detail about the feeling of energy running within him suddenly flowing in a new way, he seemed to glow with the discovery of what he was really capable of. More than a few mouths hung open, their owners enraptured. Itachi's own flow of chakra shifted, unconsciously activating his eyes. He saw every detail, every twitch of every facial muscle, every pulse of Nagato's neck as his heart beat fast with the feeling of being alive. The combined strength was nearly enough to lift Hidan from his own body. As was, he stayed put but forgot he had a body, forgot his own identity. The pink in his eyes faded to transparency. Nagato finished the story with them going up onto the roof to look for Konan. A disappointed Deidara asked if that was all. Yeah, and Nagato said firmly that what happened on the roof was nobody's business but theirs. He looked around for agreement, and Yahiko and Hidan gave it instantly. Konan seemed unwilling to talk about anything in that general area, so they all knew she would appreciate discretion without having to ask. Itachi noticed a minor twitch of the eye, little movements of the hand, in some case barely visible jumps of the muscle beneath the skin that no one else could possibly have seen. Most of them indicated Yahiko. The smiling man's face seemed just a little strained, shaken. Actually, with his eyes activated, Itachi could see that none of the three were precisely as cheerful as they seemed to be. The joy was genuine in the moment, but even Nagato was unsettled now. Something important was going on. Itachi's eyes took in everything, but his mouth stayed shut. Kisame figured they were probably doing the right thing in not speaking of it and nodded his agreement. He then looked to Itachi and several fingers on his left hand jerked. Itachi. The three looked and got their first look at Itachi's activated eyes. Nagato wondered why he got eyes that could be turned on and off where Nagato did not. Perhaps it had something to do with the redness and little commas taking up much less of the eyeball than his own eyes. Nagato's eyes didn't really have an iris or anything else, after all. Probably it was easy enough for chakra to change the color of an iris, but it couldn't just add and subtract entire structures of the eye. That made some sense. He sighed. Hidan scratched his head. That looks frickin' awesome, he admitted, but isn't there anything more? Itachi wrinkled his eyebrows. Why would Hidan guess that there was more? He focused more chakra into his eyes and winced as a painful image of his best friend's limp remains being dragged from a river flashed before his eyes. The world seemed to deepen and a large concentration of chakra gathered behind his eyes, as if it wanted to be released. Could his eyes alone have their own abilities? Deidara handed over the mirror without question, and Itachi looked. His eyes now looked like some kind of three-pointed shuriken. He handed it back and attempted to drain the chakra away. As soon as he made the effort it worked, and his eyes went back to the first level of activation, then to normal. Hidan giggled with glee. Itachi tried not to make his decision to keep an eye on the shirtless man from now on too obvious. Yahiko whispered, "That is spectacular." He somehow managed to brighten even more as he announced, "That's it. I have to find out what I can do and try it, at least once, before I say a word about making a decision. All of us should. This is a part of us we've never explored before. It wouldn't be right not to. We should allow her at least that much." After seeing the utterly trashed remains of the door and listening to Nagato's story, everyone else instinctively agreed with him. Even so, Kisame wondered if the joy of using these abilities would wear off after a while, and would the cost of living with her be too great then? Kakuzu wrinkled his face in disgust underneath the mask at the mental image of himself skipping with glee like Nagato had. He glanced sharply to his left. Hidan stopped poking his shoulder stitches and looked up, the picture of innocence. Then he looked back down at them and seemed to get a great mental image. Kakuzu had no idea how the idea of tentacles could make anyone so happy. Hidan rubbed his hands together with a sinister expression and an evil chuckle. That could not be a good sign. Sasori sighed. Fine. Being able to use strings to control things would be good, even if I never step foot in here again. Where do I have to go to get this over with? That was when everyone realized they actually had no idea where the training rooms were. Konan had evidently decided where these rooms were to be on her own. Hidan announced, "Well, let's get going then," and jumped into the middle of the group where the door had lain. His smile faltered. "OWWWW. It feels awful to be around her." He gestured toward the back of the hotel in the direction of the stairs. "You can tell where she was going from a trail?" Kakuzu asked. "No. The only reason I'm following one is to confirm it. I already know where the training rooms should be." "How? If you'd done the smart thing and looked around at the layout and shit of the entire place like I did, you would know there's only one place they could be, whole." Hidan snapped. And like that he was gone, almost etching a path in the air around the corner. Nagato wondered how close Hidan came to becoming the people he sensed. How much of the bubbly man who occasionally felt the need to hug the nearest someone was special. He shook his head and reminded himself that Konan seemed to have very strong forces beneath the surface. Most of the time Hidan was probably exactly as unique a person as he appeared to be. But around her, Nagato reminded himself that his new friend could make his own stupidly dangerous decisions. That didn't stop him from being the first to follow. After a frenzied chase which left him wondering just how much energy Konan had to spare since this seemed to be her main way of moving, Nagato found himself placing a hand on the banister and jumping over the side of the stairs when he stopped thinking for a moment to catch his breath. Luckily freefall from any height is the leading cause of temporary mindlessness in humans, or else he might not have completed the motion smoothly and continued on as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Nagato looked around quickly to either side as footsteps came down the stairs behind him in a more normal fashion. What else were his thoughts keeping from him? This was the end. There were no more steps, no sign of any presence at all. Nagato's breathing slowed as Yahiko came down next to him and looked around. Yahiko muttered. He said something about only one place where they could be. Where? He looked behind the stairs. "Oh, I think I found them." "Hey Nagato. What? The backyard is out here." "Where are they?" "The backyard's too close. The rooms next to the stairs have to either be a little small for someone to live in, or not rooms where someone's supposed to live." Nagato looked around a little more carefully and it finally registered that there were 2 rooms on either side of the stairs. He felt very stupid. Thanks for being less of an idiot than I am. I'll check the one on my side, you get the other one. Hey, don't call my best friend an idiot, Yahiko chided as he went to the room to his left. Nagato checked the one to his right. Hey, there were bars on the ceiling. Nothing else though. He left and checked out the other one. The one to the right of the stairs, the left of anyone coming down the stairwell, did not have any bars crossing the ceiling. What it did have was Konan deciding how the former door should be cut into pieces, what size, and how those pieces would be distributed with Hidan in low voices. As he neared where Yahiko stood, they were just barely able to hear Konan argue that there should be at least 2 pieces each for the floor and ceiling. Hidan asked exactly how big the targets should be. Konan replied that they should vary in size, no smaller than a couple centimeters in diameter and no larger than half a meter the same way. Hidan shook his head and said that was a really bad idea for wall, ceiling and floor targets. The smallest ones should be painted on person-shaped targets, ideally moving, which meant that the door should be cut in pieces no smaller than 3/4 of a foot in diameter. Konan paused and asked how much a foot was. Nagato and Yahiko turned to each other and nodded in unison. These two were completely insane and absolutely perfect for each other. Kakuzu had arrived in time to hear what the lower limit was, and pretended to ring imaginary bells. Sasori walked in and made it quite clear he didn't give a damn about ludicrously small targets by walking up and tapping Konan on the shoulder. She made it quite clear that nobody had gone unnoticed by dodging and turning to face him just as his finger brushed her cloak. She said nothing, only waited for him to explain such forward actions. Teach me that puppet string jutsu. Konan narrowed her eyes. That's a rather rude way of asking. You're quite confrontational, aren't you? Yes I am. Good. Shinobi need to be confrontational. I was worried that none of you would have the appropriate character, she said, while grabbing his wrist and holding it out toward the splintered door. The strings were projected from his fingers, so I believe the technique is mainly shaping your chakra and projecting it from your body in the right direction. It is probably changed in some way to attach to its target as well. Hidan, you were right about making dummies for the smaller target practice. We shall only need about 8 larger targets. Cut this door in uneven eighths from the size you mentioned up to the upper limit. Hidan practiced the new motion he would need to retrieve his scythe. The previous night he hadn't thought about reaching over his shoulder to place it on his back, blades down. Muscle memory, he supposed. After having his idea, he'd tried something new, and spun the stem in his fingers while reaching down to place it on his back, blades up. This movement still felt quite unnatural, which hampered his enjoyment of his orders somewhat. But his fingers still did the job, and it swung in a wide arc away from his body until coming up in the proper position. Ah yeah, let's cut up this shit. Watch out for splinters. Somehow he could see what the uneven eighths she asked for would look like without any real effort. Swinging it around to catch the opposite edge of the door, then pulling it back towards himself, the top little more than a foot and a half came off easily. Hidan found himself grinning without any memory of having done so, and found to his joy that he now felt about a third of the same elation Nagato had felt. So he could have the same feeling. The remaining part of the door was quickly cut in 3, then all 4 lined up on the floor. Paper clamps appeared to hold down the boards from each end. With a long, victorious slice, all of them were cut into perfect halves. Hidan swung the scythe up to rest on his shoulder as he raised his head to the ceiling and laughed. When he turned towards Konan after a good, long session of this, his eyes and mouth were open, teeth and tongue visibly urging him to bite down on something. His eyes glinted ferociously. Konan had never been with him in battle to see this before. Her face settled into familiar lines that only Nagato's enemies had ever seen deep in the depths of a megakure. The world fell away as they regarded each other, 2 predators on a hunt. Sasori could not help but be fascinated. However, there was a certain tact he exercised whenever such a scene occurred in real life as opposed to the movies. He turned his eyes away and, saying nothing, imagined the feeling of some warm energy like Nagato had described building behind his fingers. He made sure every detail in his imagining of a coil of wire was accurate, then sprung out his fingers. From each one a link projected and attached to a board. He pulled his fingers back and watched as 5 newly cut boards sprung up from the ground and hovered in midair. They were fascinating. So fascinating. Like magic they rearranged themselves in the air. Only the peanut gallery noticed his fingers move in well-practiced ways. Then they rearranged themselves again. Then one by one they were lowered to the ground, into the exact same places they had been cut. Sasori stared down, helpless to move his eyes from this even if he had wanted to. It was as if they had never been moved. Deidara came up and looked over his shoulder. Wow. I really need to get my hands on some clay. Two proud carnivorous pairs of eyes looked at the resident skeptic. Sasori. He blinked away the shock and amazement. I'm staying. Deidara grinned. I knew even a grump like you couldn't resist amazing things like this, yeah. We're going to have so much fun together, and nobody's getting in the way, yeah. Nobody messes with the Akatsuki. As he was shaken back and forth by the excited hands on his shoulders, Sasori smiled. Onan entertained herself somewhat, granting Sasori the task of using his technique to carry away the wooden pieces and carefully stack them in another room. There was no need for them until someone was available to turn them into targets, and something about the look on his face the first time was, well. He looked totally unlike himself as he used two hands to carry them all away at once. That should have been disturbing. Seeing Sasori happy should have been quite a bad sign as far as her subconscious was concerned. As she wondered about why it was not, Konan realized that she had never seen Sasori happy before under any circumstance, threatening or otherwise. What had changed? Naturally, everyone else had near instantly turned their eyes to look at her, creating a feeling like she had lasers aimed at her and ready to burn. Quickly, she asked the proper environment for their skills. She was aware of some of the elemental jutsus that Kakuzu and Kisame used, best performed outside. Deidara did not have any clay with him and would need to get some before he could do anything. She did not know the hand signs for the fire-style jutsu Itachi could use. He had been a genjutsu specialist for his entire time in the Akatsuki. That could be done indoors. She knew all of Yahiko's jutsu inside and out, and was sure Nagato would be willing to tell him how to use them. Nagato himself would need instruction in the many other things he could do. She decided to leave him for last. Itachi, Konan began. It would be simple to show him what he could do, now, as they stood inside. Have you activated the Sharingan yet? Itachi nodded and did so, the three tomos spinning into place. Yes, I have also unlocked them further, into the other design. Konan wondered how he could have known to do that. The Mangekyo Sharingan. Good. It is the Mangekyo that your original used to cast his strongest techniques. Activate it now. Itachi did so, the feeling of chakra burning behind his eyes returning. Had she confirmed his eyes themselves could use jutsu? Konan wondered just how much she should explain of the how and why his jutsu worked. She could still feel the eager stares of the onlookers glancing between her and Itachi. It seemed that for her own safety, she'd better hold off on that until later. Do you have a sense of your chakra? Yes. It feels as if I can project it out of my eyes. Konan paused. This would be the hard part. There was nothing a trained ninja was as bad at explaining as how to use chakra. It was as impossible to teach as how to walk. Good. Now, do that. Project it at me. I will not raise any defense. Itachi narrowed his eyes, pushing around the chakra near his eyes as he figured out how to control it. But there was nothing he could do. If his original had been able to do this, he could only hope muscle memory would take care of it. He closed his eyes and gathered chakra in the area. Then he opened them suddenly as if his eyelids were propelled by a spring. He purposefully suppressed the urge to flail around as his chakra twisted and organized itself strangely. Luckily for him, it took no more effort than suppressing the urge to flail around during a short fall. Before he had time to see it, the environment around Konan and himself faded to darkness. The plain whitish halls were now bathed in shadows, were the shadows. Conan's dark outfit now appeared to be mostly white. Even though they were still inside, red moonlight shone from somewhere above. Konan nodded. Do not dispel this technique just yet, Itachi, she ordered. You can control the flow of time inside this technique, Tsukiyomi, so it will appear as if only a moment has passed no matter how long we experience it. If you have any questions about how this works or what it is, we have all the time in the world. Itachi realized this had the potential to be the most useful jutsu of them all if properly used. And yes, he did have many questions. They sat and discussed at length the nature of genjutsu, the nature of the Sharingan, the Mangekyo Sharingan, and for a short time he even convinced her to elaborate on his family as it was necessary during the course of telling him about the other things that she mentioned his clan in Ping. He was quite sure that his ability to shorten the amount of time that Ped in this genjutsu reached its limit as she told him of the maker. My parents, my cousins, uncle and auntie, at least Sasuke survived. How could I have done that to him? Murder. My original was a cold-blooded murderer. Konan's ability to speak was distorted by the time freeze. She watched with detached curiosity as Itachi realized who he had been. Out of the corner of her eye, Konan saw the ground begin to flow past. She looked in all directions, even standing up to look behind Itachi. The open-ceilinged room they were in was changing, flowing together until it seemed to be part of a different building. It didn't take a genius to figure out what this new building might be. She might have been curious about what this version of Itachi's past had looked like, but not that curious. Before taking action, though, she did pause to see how the scene change would proceed. Was he really as much of a ninja as he had seemed to be before? The transparent room slowed in its flowing together and paused, muddled and confused. At her feet Itachi took a deep shuddering breath, shook his head. He ground his nails into his palms, focusing his energy on thinking about anything else and keeping his chakra still. Konan realized she had forgotten to mention something important about the nature of chakra too late to stop what was about to happen. Before she could move her illusory body, the red moon dimmed and collapsed, and the ground fell into darkness. For some time she was paralyzed, or felt like it in the absence of any indication she was moving. Then the darkness abruptly lifted, and once more she and Itachi stood facing each other. Itachi sensed he was no longer sitting and opened his eyes. He seemed surprised to be back in the real world. He looked at Konan for answers. With as neutral a voice as she could manage, Konan told him, "Well done. A shinobi who specializes in genjutsu must have good mental control. Without it a genjutsu can quickly spin out of control and fail. However, you must remember that chakra is like blood. It is always meant to be flowing. Keeping chakra from flowing is actually a common way to break out of a genjutsu. What you meant to do was keep your chakra flowing steadily in the same way. Remember that." Itachi nodded, an acknowledgement she returned only very quickly before turning to the rest of them. "Deidara, you will need clay before you can do anything. Everyone else, jutsus are better practiced outside. Come." For Kakuzu's demonstration, she led them to the very small area of open gr behind the building. It was about large enough for all of them to gather sitting without being excessively close to one another. But for the earth-style jutsu she was pretty sure Kakuzu could use as his native element, even a small area would be enough. She had him use a very basic earth jutsu she had learned of. All it did was cause earth to bubble up from the ground like water and turn to stone, but this astounded the easily impressed clones. They wanted to know if the techniques had names. She mentioned that they did, but she did not know the name of this particular technique. Kakuzu decided to call it Stonemaker Jutsu. He seemed to be looking at the results of his labor with focused eyes. Konan wondered what use he was thinking of for it. It was just as well that Kisame used water-style jutsu. She may not have known the exact hand signs his original had used, but she knew enough of how water-style worked to make something up. The amount of chakra he put into it was much more than he needed. His secret enthusiasm was betrayed by this, but Konan did not expect anyone else to notice as they followed the enormous wave that resulted with mouths agape. A relatively large tree, still puny by her standards, was nearly pulled out of the ground. The little stream Hidan had led them to was dry for a good 30 seconds until its source accumulated enough water to flow again, and the large tree was left at a tilt that could easily see it fall if a major storm struck anytime soon. Kisame stood staring at the soaked earth as the peanut gallery clapped quietly. Deidara did not have the material to use his techniques with. That left Yahiko as the only other one who had not yet demonstrated his abilities. Nagato walked up to Konan before everyone else was quite finished looking at the results of the wave and asked her about Yahiko's jutsu. He surmised correctly that she would not be comfortable giving instructions directly. She listened carefully, but nothing in his voice carried any hint of judgment for this. Konan supposed she should be glad he wasn't pressuring her to talk about that part of her past just yet. He listened carefully as she told him and covertly demonstrated the hand signs Yahiko would need to use, nodding. Itachi had a good idea what they were up to, as did Sasori. Kisame heard the sound of whispering and noticed, too. He understood when Nagato returned to Yahiko's side and repeated the demonstration to him. After the stream was back to half its former flow, Yahiko flushed and wondered what the technique he had been taught would do. He hoped it wouldn't have similar effects to Kisami's. That tree didn't deserve to be ripped out of the ground like that, and it might fall on an animal someday. He paid careful attention to the feeling of his chakra changing as he formed the signs. He exhaled and allowed the onlookers to boost his confidence as he made the last sign. The water exploded upwards and formed into a stream in mid-air. He had aimed at a sturdier-looking tree and tried to keep the amount of chakra used to a minimum, so the stream had only the effect of a slightly larger than usual hose as it fired itself at the trunk. Yahiko smiled when he saw the harmlessness of his technique, and how controlled and contained it was. The force of a solid stream with more water behind it would be enough to knock a large man down, easily. He turned to Nagato to celebrate. As their palms met in a high five, he wondered at the gentleness of it. Everyone else had been horrified to hear their originals described, but from the look of it, Yahiko's original had been much more like he was now. He was saddened by the memory of how Konan had described that. It probably wasn't her fault. If brutality was what her world demanded of ninjas, he had to admit he did not and probably could not ever meet that standard. But this world was different, wasn't it? Nagato was certainly proud enough. Konan stood off to the side, perhaps watching from the corner of her eye but revealing nothing. Nagato continued to stand in front of him, eyes shining with a fond look that Yahiko didn't recognize. His arms visibly trembled before folding across his chest. Yahiko smiled at him and shook his head. There were a few things about his friend that he still didn't understand and doubted he ever would. The first was that they had known each other since childhood, and yet, Nagato was still shy about overt demonstrations of friendliness. Yahiko didn't want to force anything if Nagato had some reason to be uncomfortable, but this time he felt it would be more awkward to take time to entice him into it. So with a large smile, he rushed forward, crossed the space between them, and wrapped Nagato in a strong but gentle hug. He felt the brief stiffening before Nagato relaxed into it. Why? At the edge of his vision, Konan turned her head away. Sigh, it's as if no matter what I do, she can't stand it. And, Nagato, is there some reason he's uncomfortable? Konan walked away and sat on the back stoop, carefully avoiding the bird excrement all around the handles and railings. She watched silently with no movement in her face as the group changed in configuration. There was Hidan, smirking at Nagato after he was released from the hug, then turning to Kakuzu a moment later and challenging him to see which was harder, the scythe or the stone. Kisame looked at Yahiko and nodded politely. Yahiko suggested they practice their jutsus together. Deidara looked around at the ground, wondering what clay looked like. He went over to ask Hidan. Sasori seemed to be looking at something in the air, occasionally moving his hands in front of him as if to move a piece around. Everybody else stayed clear by a few feet so as not to interrupt. Even Itachi dodged around the engineer as he walked towards Konan. Everyone else he nudged with his elbows or feet as he ped, until everyone was paying attention. They looked after Itachi as he walked up and stopped before her. The look in his eyes was calm but ready. It looked a little like Sasori had looked earlier. She decided the best move would be to stay seated. Itachi tilted his head a little from side to side, just enough to make sure he had everyone's attention before speaking. We need rules. Not hard ones, not specific directions, but there are ways in which we can and cannot be treated. These need to be made clear, Itachi announced. To begin with, what is it you expect of us? Cannot be treated, or refuse to. Is he bringing a problem to my attention, or challenging my authority? Konan tried to figure out what he was aiming for, and what combination of firmness and softness she should bring. She wasn't unfamiliar with the concept of subordinates talking back. They were criminals. Almost everyone in the Akatsuki had spoken out of turn at several points. But these versions of them seemed much more normal. Then why was he confronting her like this? Perhaps they are still themselves enough that I need to prove myself to have any kind of authority. Well, then, I expect a lot of you to get along without any significant infighting. I expect you to be prepared whenever I should ask for I stance, and keep your eyes and ears open for any problems I don't know about. Hidan, I expect you to keep us reliably informed, which means you should spend as much time as you need searching your memory for anything you haven't already told us that could be important. I don't care how hard that is, do it. I expect you all to be useful, practice your skills, and strengthen your teamwork if you need to. I expect you all to be capable of meeting any threat. Should be just mild enough for them to agree to. Itachi nodded. Those are things we can do. However, I do not expect that as the full list, nor is it very specific as to how you want us to do and be those things. I will tell you what we cannot and will not do. If any of those things you listed can't be accomplished in the way you thought of them being accomplished, revise your methodology. The list of things we cannot be includes everything you implied in the earlier description of our originals, abilities. Even now, you talk of threats and enemies. We do not think of the world in terms of enemies and threats. We may not expect a stranger to always offer I stance, we may be wary, but that doesn't change the fact that our mindset regarding other people leans much more to the friendly stranger side. We will not allow someone who is legitimately a danger to attack, but neither will we be nearly as cautious as you seem to expect. Even the most paranoid person here will not behave in a hostile way or expect others to without reason. If we don't act the way you want, that's why. The list of things we flat out refuse to be includes certain things you alluded to when describing our abilities. All but the most disturbed would agree that murder, excessive destruction of property, desecration of dead bodies, torture, and a host of other things are morally wrong. I do not mean any offense. I am sure your morals are perfectly acceptable by the standards you are used to. But this world has a much different standard of acceptable, a standard different enough that the killing of a strong person which you praise is to us a terrible thing that no sane person should even wish to speak of. We are not weak, if it should be necessary, but we have much stronger taboos against causing harm than you do, and it will not be at all easy or natural or something we get over quickly. We will not use some of the abhorrent jutsus you described, we will not agree with you or think the way you do, and we will feel morally justified in refusing to do actions which fall under those categories. Do not ask us to cross moral boundaries lightly. I predict a lot of misunderstandings, frustration, and conflict could easily arise from misunderstanding where our moral boundaries are. That was made obvious earlier. In return for your demands, what we demand of you is that you try to understand us. It may not be easy, but our preference in this part of this world is a leader we can like or at least respect on a personal level. Expecting us to be like our originals is a waste of time and we will treat it as such. Itachi then inclined his head as he had noticed she did, correctly thinking that it was a sign of respect. His voice was a mixture of multiple things, none of them matching with his words. Konan tried to combine the two in her head and found she could not. For the first time she was reduced to looking at him incredulously. On the one hand, he said this was his way of solving a potential problem. On the other hand, his words can best be summarized as, we reserve the exclusive right to do whatever we want and not listen to you, off. Back to the first hand, all his body language and tone of voice is highly respectful. Back to the other hand, he and everyone else will judge my behavior and morals and tell me how I fail to live up to their standards to my face. Is this their version of respect? And they expect me to understand, perhaps even practice it. Such polite rudeness would be a good reason to weaken ties with an ally at least, if not sever them. Part of the duties of any shinobi ranked above genin is to negotiate with enemies, at least sometimes. They do not make good shinobi. Hidan moved to stand to the side, looking between her and Itachi. Dude, I can feel the respect dropping like a ing rock. And I'm also a little mad. I have no clue what it was that you said or how you said it, but that was rude as shit. Itachi blinked at him. My intent was only to describe and explain the consequences of certain expectations in as close to a factual, objective way as I can. I did not intend to be rude. Hidan shrugged. He could feel things, but he couldn't read minds to tell the reason why. Konan wanted to take this opportunity to be rude in response anyway. You ask to reserve the right to refuse orders and do whatever you want. Apparently feel that permitting enemies to act unchecked is more important than stopping them, at the same time excuse this by claiming you are unable to stop those who would like to do harm, issue demands to me as if you've completely forgotten who is where, and reserve the right to judge me, my actions, and my very thoughts as if they are somehow appropriate things for you to be concerned with. You ask me to understand the utter lack of respect or appropriate treatment that the standards of this world permit. Then stop speaking such hypocritical statements as, we prefer a leader we can respect. Respect means that a subordinate will do as he is told. Clearly you have none. Itachi actually found himself at a loss for words, his mouth hanging open. He had made the mistake of thinking that just because her standards were lower in one area, they would be lower in general. That was a bad mistake to make. Humans are always more paradoxical than that. Well, actually, it is considered respectful to point out someone's flaws. This is a way to indicate that you believe they are strong and capable of growing and becoming better people, a way to help them do so. If one of us were to leave someone alone, allow them to continue making mistakes, it would be a sign that we believed they were unable to change and were not strong enough to overcome their flaws and fix their mistakes. The only reason to refuse to tell someone what they are doing wrong is that it would be a wasted effort. I don't think you are so weak that you cannot change your expectations or actions to be more effective. That did make a kind of logical sense, actually. Konan stared at him, now aware that Itachi was really as confused as she was. And why is it your business to try to correct the way I do my job? Hidan piped up. Did you not hear the part about friendly strangers? Helping someone who obviously needs it is everyone's business as long as they're in the same group. If it's like family shit they need help with, anyone who's part of the family can try to help. If it's shit where someone is physically injured or something like that where pretty much everyone in this culture, so like a whole country or so, can agree physically hurting people is bad, then anyone in the country could help, even if you don't know them, and probably a stranger from another country too as long as they have the same morals. Your job is shit having to do with the Akatsuki, so since we're all considered part of that group we're all able to help you with that. Just because you're in a different part of the group doesn't change shit. As long as the problem is something affecting us, we get to try and change it. Konan now stared at him. A different part of the group. As if she was just over to the side. No barrier. Was that really how? She stood up, looked around with all the self-awareness of a coma patient. Everyone her gaze crossed seemed to understand perfectly and nodded. Yahiko brightened and tried to look her in the eye but she instinctively deflected down to the ground. Now that he was done speaking from what he himself believed, Hidan scratched his head confused. Now that he thought about it, aside from that night they had spent talking just the two of them together and their first meeting where it had also been just the two of them for a wonderful moment, he always felt kind of a space between them. Considering his own personal attitudes called for even less space than people of this world normally had, his mind was seriously reaching to feel like that. Woof. He groaned. You know, my job is to walk up to people and know them like a therapist or a friend or some shit even if they didn't hire me and I've never seen them for a second before. In Headache City. You look like awesome lady, so, well I guess I kinda want to do the same thing, only for real in a long time and shit. So probably you should get used to no space. Nasty burrowing termites, I have better things to be thinking about. Let's just get this the over with. Nagato filed that away as weight, he does that for a living. Kakuzu was forced to reevaluate his longtime Oshiate. He'd known of Hidan's activities, but had always written them off as a compulsion before. Clever little bastard. He makes better use of his talents than I thought. Yahiko smiled in a way that, unnoticed to him, always caused Nagato to get that strange fond look in his eyes. I trust him. He is trusted. It's perfect. I couldn't have left my job to anyone better. Konan nodded and reached out to pat Hidan on the head. Of course you don't do anything the appropriate way, I do not believe your original was even entirely human. You're not like everyone else. It's okay for you to act strange. But, her eyes flicked to the side again. If it was meant kindly, I suppose I should put in some effort, shouldn't I? Hidan fought to open his eyes fully even as she continued petting him. Yeah, please, oh yes please, more by the ear, oh yeah, please do. I have looking at all my memories to get to, sounds like a super headache. Oh yes there. His mumbling degenerated into deep purring. If not for that, Konan realized that his mumbles of pleasure might have sounded distinctly to anyone who didn't know Hidan. That is not. No. She took her hand away and grabbed his arm to lead him inside. Hidan reluctantly stumbled after her, looking disappointed. Most of the emboled group was faintly amused. Nagato realized the true reason why she dragged him away and agreed wholeheartedly. Yahiko wondered why petting a person-shaped cat would be something anyone would need to hide and was still confused. He chalked it up to cultural differences. Itachi's face was hidden by his palm. I should have seen this coming. Kisame snorted and asked, how? You couldn't have known a lady who talks about murder like it's a game would get so bent out of shape over rudeness, even if you had predicted she'd think it was rude. Itachi shook his head, hand still in place over his eyes. No, that's not it. I was only looking at this from one viewpoint, ours. I should have thought that she must have some reason for her actions. Yahiko was still elated. Well, she agreed, right. That's all we wanted. I'd really like to get to practicing and other things, hopefully that'll help us understand her better. Maybe now that she understands it's a kind thing to do, she'll tell me what I'm doing wrong. Perhaps not. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I don't think we can do very much. Yahiko sighed. Nagato, do you really think so badly about her? No, but I do think that maybe, I just don't think you are doing anything wrong. But, why would she hate me if I haven't done anything? Kakuzu rolled his eyes. She liked Hidan when we first met her in the bar, and he hadn't done anything either. It's probably something your original did. Yahiko looked wounded. But, my abilities, they aren't. Nagato put a firm hand on his shoulder. It doesn't matter. Just keep being you, and she'll learn to tell the difference eventually. Everything's going to be okay. Wow, you guys are really bad at coming up with solutions to social things like this, Sasori said with an audible smirk. Itachi's hand fell away from his face. Enlighten us. Sasori flinched, just a little. Or, I guess, things like this are hard for everyone. No need to get so fluffed up about it. Geez. Deidara jabbed Sasori in the ribs. Come on, Sasori, I need to go ask a man about some clay, and there's got to be some kind of space you could build things in around here, yeah. This place has everything. Maybe if she likes Hidan, petting him could make her feel better, Yahiko decided. Could you guys hold off for a few minutes? Kakuzu sighed and sat on a fallen log at the edge of the trees. Fine with me. It's about time we took a few minutes to have some peace and quiet around here. Kisame nodded, already committed to enjoying his peace. Hidan lay sprawled on his belly across Konan's bed. He had lain across the short way, so his legs fell off the other side. Even so, he luxuriated in absolute contentment, and his muscles had the look of flesh that has been worked in precisely the right way. Konan sat in front of him, her right arm tracing the bottom of his hairline. In the occasional moments when his rolled-up eyes would glance at her, they shared a look of pleasure. He was much too relaxed for sustained rumbling, but every so often as he turned his head for an easier reach he would let out a dusky purr. If it weren't for the fact that it was utterly impossible to imagine Konan ever not wearing that impressive-looking cloak, Deidara and Sasori might have thought something had happened in the 5 minutes they had agreed to wait. Konan's hand dropped away as she heard them coming and stood up to resume her business, but Hidan continued to sprawl. He looked up lazily as Deidara explained why they were there. Even the excitement radiating from him and, to a lesser extent, from Sasori could not disturb Hidan's contented mood. He worked his jaw from side to side a few seconds before Deidara finished asking the 2 questions he had, so he would be able to answer immediately. He told Day that there was good clay around a pretty major river to the northeast, not far, and told Sasori of the little shed hidden around the far side of the hotel with enough space for a small vehicle. They thanked him and left in high spirits, Sasori silently looking between him and Konan and covertly giving a thumbs up. Konan left the door open but there was no indication of anyone else wanting her or Hidan. She stepped back and turned to look at him, almost embered by Hidan's appearance. She consoled herself by not regretting his happiness in the slightest. He looked up at her and smiled in a much cuter way than usual, a shy little smile that turned up the corners of his mouth, one just barely higher than the other. Belly rubs. Konan would have liked nothing more than to give him a thorough belly rub. Yet, she stayed standing. Hidan felt a little emptiness inside him. Other me, where the have you gone? He stretched his ears and yawned, moving on. Where were we again? Some in exploring, right? Konan nodded. Yes. I need to speak with Itachi some more. Such attitudes may work well in this world, but I have a feeling about this particular part of this world. In this small part of it, ninjas exist. That alone is a reason to take up caution. I refuse to give up mine, whatever that means for their view of me. Come. Hidan pushed himself up on the bed slowly. Fine. What about clothes, though? Konan considered. Everyone else is here together and knows at least one ability of theirs. We do not have any enemies right now. Take all things together, and I believe we have time to go into town and visit a tailor if you wish to get a cloak like this as soon as possible. Hidan pushed himself all the way up and shook himself, grinning. Oh yeah, this is urgent shit. We can always take care of the basement people later, but it takes time to get clothes. He hopped off the bed and bounced as he ran over. Yes, please. Konan smiled, and they left. As they walked down the road between the lived-in houses that led to town, Konan sighed. Hidan heard this and jogged to catch up with her, abandoning the butterfly he had been staring at. What's wrong? Konan pointed with her chin at the trees between some houses they ped. In my world, ninja commonly travel through the trees, or on other tall structures. In this world, the trees have branches that are too small and closely crowded to make this possible, and these houses belong to civilians that would be frightened. I've always taken such a basic part of shinobi life for granted. It never occurred to me to think of being unable to travel freely. Hidan looked at the trees he could see behind the houses and tried to picture it. Bigger branches, less of them, huh? What are the trees like in your world? This is pretty normal for us. I'm not a botanist, but some basic things are common knowledge. Trees take about 3 years to grow to this size. If undisturbed for a decade, they get much larger than this. As each branch expands, it's easy to see how not all of them can remain since they are so close to each other now. Branches that are useful now will be badly placed to weather a storm as the tree gets taller and break off. By the time a tree gets to 15 years old, the lower branches are thick and sparse enough for a human to travel. Give it a few more decades, like trees deep in the forest get, and there won't be any lower branches remaining. The upper branches will be easily thick enough for a human to stand on without attaching himself to the wood with chakra, and sparse enough for travel. When traveling this way through the deep forest, a ninja is fairly isolated between the canopy above and the leaves of shorter trees below. Travel speed is, 1.5 times the speed of a horse at full gallop, and if one should fall it is a long way to the ground. That doesn't matter because the only ninjas that would be sent on missions so far from their village would be very experienced ones that almost never have a traveling accident unless they are very ill. Hidan stared. Konan blinked away her visions of her old world, how could nostalgia set in so quickly, and glanced at him. What's wrong? Hidan continued staring as they walked. Pretty sure these trees are a decade or so. Sure as shit they're not only 3 years old. That one, he pointed to a tree with a few lower branches that were thick enough to stand on, but still close enough to others that one would have to crouch, that one's almost certainly, like, a couple decades. Trees don't grow that fast. Konan took a closer look at the tree he indicated. It was a nicely sized 7-year-old in her experience. That is the result of decades of growth. Yeah, wood is some dense shit. I've heard that it takes some time to get it, but wood can be as strong as steel. You take a hacksaw to the ends of those twigs, and it'll still be a good several saws before they come off. Stubborn bastards. But yeah, there's no way a material as strong as that would be grown fast. That's probably why we got steel, it's faster to make. There is no possible way that can be true. If you can exert enough force to lift a grown human and throw him at a wooden wall in the first place, that is enough force to throw him through the wall. Wood is not that strong. Like shit it isn't. If a person goes running up to a wall, you know what's going to happen. They get knocked on there, break their nose if they weren't going fast enough to break their head, and get laughed at. Only cartoon characters, fictional ones that people draw doing funny things for kids to laugh at, only those guys can go through a wall without hurting themselves. I've tripped and fallen against the wall of that bar you met us at before. The doctors had to do a scan to tell if I had a concussion or not. You are telling the truth about this? Sure as shit. Konan fell silent and stared at small cracks in the street as it ped under her. It might be possible, she supposed. It was known that paper made from the wood of trees that were carefully cultivated with chakra exhibited unusual properties if chakra was run through it. It was no mystery that chakra could change the properties of wood. Possibly, not having any in this world affected the way trees usually grew. But Konan could not make sense of the way not having chakra changed tree growth in this world. Hidan. Yep. The only difference between our worlds that is likely to have caused this is the presence of chakra. There is chakra present in my world, and it does freely circulate through the environment and all living things, so trees would have access to it. However, chakra is commonly used in taijutsu and other forms of physical exercise to enhance the strength of muscles. It qualifies as another form of energy to draw from on top of the normal chemical energy of food, so it makes perfect sense that chakra has the power to enhance organic tissues. But what you've described is the opposite. Trees somehow produce weaker wood in a world where chakra exists. How is that possible? Hidan did a double take. Huh. Wow. That is completely different from what I was thinking. What were you thinking? Hidan scratched his head. Do trees start producing seeds and baby trees when they're about this size in your world? Konan nodded. Oh, that makes perfect sense then, because since chakra is a thing in your world and it makes muscles stronger, then you need more baby trees and they can do that when they grow faster. Konan considered his words. They made no sense now, but she was sure they would when he gave her the slower explanation. Slower? Hidan, you need to explain things slower. Oh, well, when you have little plants or tiny animals that are really weak and die fast, they also have babies really fast so their species doesn't die out and shit. If you die a lot, you need to have a lot of babies before you do. So, I was thinking that it makes a lot of sense because in your world chakra lets you use all kinds of super dangerous jutsus and shit that can kill trees really easily, so maybe since your world is more dangerous for them they evolved to grow faster to have babies faster. Kisami's jutsu still came these close to uprooting a pretty big tree, so it's not like being stronger helps our trees resist being killed that much. So you think the benefits of chakra strengthening a tree's tissues are outweighed by the increased danger from animals being more destructive, so the presence of chakra is actually bad for a tree's survival in the long run. Yeah, so they go the Kakuzu route instead. Konan held up a hand as she turned to face Hidan. Do not tell me what that meant. I want to see how well I know you. Hidan grinned. After such thorough petting earlier, there was no way this awesome lady could possibly get it wrong. He started counting in his head so he could see how long it took her. I think you could have substituted Kakuzu's name in that sentence with, cheap. Hidan let out a sustained squeaking sound. Less than 5 seconds. Oh shit, I think I love her. There was no one around this time so he threw caution to the wind and hugged her. Pet me. Give me orders. And occasionally treats. Love me. Konan let him hold her. Even before seeing the look in his eyes, she did not have a strong desire to do otherwise. Now, she would have destroyed all her most valued possessions to avoid doing so. She was also not psychic, but that didn't matter when he was so close. It was plainly obvious what he was thinking. Since she knew what he was thinking, she was able to decipher his mumbled demands, fueling her desire to stay here with him. After a few seconds she wondered if her Hidan would have had the same desires, or a slightly different list. Hidan felt his train of thought sink into a swamp. As he released Konan, still grinning like a loon despite everything, he wondered. Why are we so ed with? Other me, where the air you? Konan. Despite everything, the conversation continued. It wasn't even very stilted. There are several other things that theory could explain, Konan murmured thoughtfully. If you were talking with a Konoha ninja in my world, it was a common occurrence for a gust of wind to blow leaves off the nearby trees during a conversation. The leaves were always green and healthy, still capable of service if they had remained attached to the tree. Now that I think about it, it does seem questionable that a tree would shed serviceable parts so quickly. What's Konoha mean? Konohagakure. The village hidden in the leaves. I have a theory that something about them is actually connected to the leaves of the trees around them. It would explain why times of strong emotion on a leaf ninja's part usually included the gust I just described. Hidan snorted. That makes perfect sense. Did any other ninjas do that? Konan had no idea. I do not know. I know about the leaves because I saw it. It was not something unusual enough for anyone to bother talking about. Konoha was the only foreign village I ever visited, so I don't know. Other major villages were named after stone, sand, clouds, things like that. It's possible. I just never saw anything. Hidan looked down at himself. What village did you come from? Konan's steps did not falter. A Megakure, the village hidden in the rain. Why? Hidan's steps did falter a little. Nothing. Ow. And what village do I come from? I believe it was called Yugakure, the village of hot water. Hidan was silent. He carefully looked back and forth along the main road before turning onto it to enter town, but continued saying nothing. Konan looked at him uneasily. His brows were drawn together, staring somewhere on the ground in front of him. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking, but she gave it a guess. Hot water isn't very impressive from a, possibly controlling elements of nature, point of view. He's probably disappointed. Probably doesn't consider it a good name. Does he like hot water at all? Given his knowledge of the forest, he might be a little jealous of the people who come from the Leaf Village. Disappointment, then, perhaps a little envy. She tugged on his hand. Hidan looked up, meeting her eyes. Let me guess. Disappointed and jealous. Hidan scowled and looked down again. Yeah, all the other villages you mentioned, they're named after big things you can find anywhere. Trees, rocks, rain, shit like that. But other Mi's village was named after hot water. As in, a super specific type of water that you definitely don't find everywhere. It was small, wasn't it? Konan nodded. Figured it was. That name is so small, it had to be. I don't believe this shit. I couldn't even have come from an impressive village like you or these Leaf people. Probably a rundown middle of nowhere shithole. Sigh it. Konan tightened her grip on his hand, squeezing it gently while she tried to think of the right words. It's alright, Hidan. Your original made it all the way to the Akatsuki, didn't he? There were only 10 of us then, which was as high as our membership ever got. There were some very high requirements for joining. We only accepted very strong ninjas, ones who could terrify entire teams of high-ranked shinobi by themselves. You made it into a very exclusive group. You deserved to be there. She let go of his hand. Best not to spoil herself too much. You were probably the most important one to come out of that village, yes. But you did. Cherish it. Hidan looked at her with renewed focus. He was silent once more as they walked together, his attention riveted on this ferocious woman who had just called him the best thing to come out of a tiny village. Nothing he could feel now felt dishonest in any way. There were so many things he wanted to say. But of them all, which was the best? Hey Konan. Yes. Quote. Konan looked at him sideways, watching patiently. His jaw moved soundlessly, opening sometimes as if he had something to say, then closing without a word. His expression relaxed, brightened, clouded, grew annoyed, then confused. It was impossible to trace or guess his thoughts in any one direction. She just stayed quiet, waited for him to come to a conclusion while she kept an eye and ear out for cars. The street was quiet today. This town did not seem to be the center of much activity, if any. They knew better than that, of course. But it was good that there was no overt danger for now. I've never had a family before. She turned, stared. Family. Before. What does he mean by that? Hidan just scratched his head. It seemed to be a nervous tick whenever he was uncertain about an interaction. Had he known he was going to say that? Or perhaps he was uncertain of her reaction. She did dislike talking about family as a matter of course. Even in the past, she had a vague idea that hers had been somehow different from the experience of others. But she'd be damned before she'd let that keep her from accepting his words, his attempt at a bond. Never before. What do you mean by that? Hidan looked back in the direction they had come from. Well, I kinda have something wrong with my memory, I guess. Kakuzu has said so, and I had to have had a family at some point, right? They turned a corner, Hidan stopping briefly and looking around to make sure of where he was first. Once he had it fixed in his mind, he moved almost on autopilot, continuing without needing a response. It's nothing major, just that Kakuzu says that sometimes I do things and don't really remember them. He's told me of things I've said that don't make any sense, to him or to me when he repeats it. Maybe it's something else, or maybe it has something to do with, well, my first memory is Kakuzu, I mean. He reached back and ran his hand along the top edge of the scythe on his back. Konan had noticed and briefly thought of questioning why he brought it with him when walking into a town of civilians. She had dismissed this with a note to ask why he was so attached to his scythe at a convenient time. Now, a new idea occurred to her. It's almost like it's a part of him. Does he even notice that he has the scythe with him now? He would probably notice more if it was not on his back. Where did he get it? My first memory ever is of seeing Kakuzu. I think I was on the side of a road somewhere and he was checking to see if I was okay. I was 8, so, I must have had a family at some point because I had to have been born, but I don't really remember. Konan, do you know anything of that? She shook her head slowly, parsing through his words. 8 years old. That really is unusual. I'm sorry. Hidan looked around, getting back to more normal business. At the last possible moment Konan thought of something. Wait. Hidan spun around to face her. Bah, I do know one thing. When your original left his village and became a missing nin, he did so in a fit of anger at the degeneracy of his village. He murdered half the village and set fires that burned down another quarter. The people that he murdered included his own parents. I mentioned it once around him. His face lit up as if he was remembering the greatest day of his life. That doesn't say anything for sure about you. Whatever led him to be happy about killing them in my world might have been just a minor problem in an otherwise healthy relationship in this one. But whatever it was, there was a problem in his family. Hidan blinked, absorbing her words. So, you think there was some shit that was unpleasant? I guess that'd kinda make sense. I never got any surge of unpleasant feelings from wondering about them, so I always figured I must have run away for some other reason. If I ran away because they were, that would suck. I always hoped my parents were at least a little cool. Konan looked at him with sympathy in her heart, a feeling she had never thought she would have for this man. At least I get to remember, and what I get to remember is mostly positive. 8 years old was how old I was when I lost them. If I couldn't even remember what I had lost, would I miss it less because I wouldn't know what I was missing, or would I miss it more because I had nothing to hold on to, not even a memory? I don't even remember what I felt when I saw his happiness at the memory of killing them. It was a jumbled mess of things. But Nagato or Yahiko, if they had seen that, most certainly would have been enraged. To take and reject what we lost before we were ready should have angered me. But we had something to miss. Could it have been justified in his case? Hidan looked up and down the street. There's the place. Oh, shit, I hope it won't take them too long to make me one. I'd have to start chewing through my arms like SpongeBob after a while. Sasori paced around the small space he had, measuring out with his feet what it would feel like to move around in, to work in. It was smaller than his workspace at the repair shop, but not by much. In fact, considering the extra room at the shop was mostly the little legroom he could just barely squeeze himself through to get behind the machines, it came out to about the same since there were no machines here. Thank God for being small-framed. As he walked around, crossing from side to side getting a feel for the space, Sasori wondered about the purpose he would put it to. Konan said my original made puppets. Remind me to ask her what century her world was in, because I can't remember when was the last time puppets were the height of technological sophistication. And he controlled them with strings, apparently. I won't deny how cool those strings are. His fingers twitched now with the memory of just how right it had felt to be moving those chakra strings earlier, but I'm going to be so far behind the times if I stick to those. I don't think anyone would say anything, but I'd be a laughingstock in my own head at least. My original's techniques are no good. Looks like I have to put the strings aside and start over. He stopped in the middle, looking around. Yes, some engineer's instinct deep in his being told him, this is a good place. He looked to the right and easily, as if the vision was gifted to him, saw his tools spread out on the little table on that side. In the back, there was an old generator. If it was still in working order, He could probably modify it to reduce the current it put out so a single machine could be safely hooked up to it. A machine, puppets. So several centuries ago. I don't know the slightest thing about robots. But really, there's no working difference between a robot and a machine aside from artificial intelligence, and since I have chakra, that's not a problem. It can work from my intelligence. There was one problem, though. The little garage was completely free of materials. Sasori began to draw up a list of what he would need in his head. I am definitely going to have to hit up someone for money. Oh well, the inventor's curse strikes again. Deidara. The river Hidan had mentioned was easy to find. For one, the trees changed as they approached the large source of water. Dei questioned why he even noticed. What? Was other me a botanist? Didn't sound like it. He could have been anything, I guess. Maybe it was a side interest or he needed to pay attention to changing plants to keep track of where he was while flying, yeah. Or maybe paying attention to things like this is just part of ninja life, yeah. Wait, I'm looking for a river so I can get clay. Other me used clay. Duh, he's obviously had to look for rivers before. Of course I'm good at this, He snorted and tapped himself sharply on the head, scolding himself. For another, the part of the river he approached made some noise, so he was able to hear its faint burbling well before he could see it. As Deidara walked toward the sound, he wondered what kind of river it was. His mind called up the image from the front cover of the version of Huckleberry Finn that he'd had to read in school. He tried to think of something else because there was no way that kind of river would make this kind of noise or be totally unknown to him, but he had nothing to replace it with so that image remained. After that mental image, the actual river was a disappointment. It was large enough to carry a person away, which was the only standard for calling something a river instead of a stream that had ever made sense to him, but only just. The sound was from where several rocks jutted out midstream, forcing the water around and over them. He didn't see any fish. Dei shook his head. He wasn't here to go fishing. He was here to look at the ground, yeah. Hopefully he would be as good at this as he was at finding the river in the first place. Deidara looked upriver. Didn't see anything that super stood out to him on the banks. He looked downriver. The dirt he could see looked its usual shade of brown. What does clay look like? Let's see. I've heard soils with clay are really bad for planting because they have small particles or something and don't hold water well. All the modeling clay I've ever seen was white. Pretty sure they have to add dyes to colored stuff like Play-Doh, yeah. So it's probably white, and soft looking. So, would small particled stuff like clay go downriver more or be dropped upriver? What was the rule for that? Crap, I hated earth science. Would have paid so much more attention if I'd known the future, yeah. After 4 minutes and several taps to the side of his head as if he could physically jog the memory free, Deidara remembered. Oh my god, I am such an idiot. Small means light, which means the water can carry it farther, obviously. I shouldn't be failing at common sense so much, yeah. I know this ninja stuff is all kinds of weird, but that doesn't mean this world and its normal rules just turned off. Common sense still works, you moron. Each word was punctuated by sharp taps to his head. Grumbling, he set off downriver. Deidara walked high on the bank, staying dry and looking to the side to see what he could. So far nothing. Several more minutes ped. Nothing. Yet more minutes ped. He groaned. He should have asked if Hidan knew any specific place that had clay. Well, it's not his fault. All he could do was point me here, yeah. If I didn't follow his pointing accurately or whatever, what could he do? Give me a guided tour. That was when he tripped over a root and fell, twisting to the side to avoid a stone. Unfortunately, the side he twisted to was his left, which was the side the river was on. Before he was fully, coherently aware of anything, he landed in the water with a splash. Reflexively he held his breath, but he didn't have much of it. He twisted, trying to figure out which way was up. His heart raced, making the breath situation even worse. His stomach muscles tightened to try to stop himself from inhaling. Dei clawed at the water, resulting in absolutely nothing. His vision dimmed, and he tried to hold on to what breath he had. Even as his vision grew darker and his arms reached out sluggishly, a vague idea traced its way through his mind. Dei opened his mouth and exhaled. In the relatively calm and steady waters, the bubble rose undisturbed. Didera watched as it drifted past his ear, rising behind him. Pushing the last of his adrenaline-based strength into his arms, he pushed himself in that direction. He lost control and inhaled just as his head broke the surface of the water, triggering a coughing fit that made spots swim before his eyes for the second time today. Puking. Drowning. Is there a god I don't know about messing with me? Yeah. He stopped coughing eventually and reached out to hold onto a solitary rock jutting out of the water as he drifted past. Holding onto that rock, that beautiful, beautiful rock, Didera laid his head down on top of it and whimpered. I didn't know I hated water before, but I hate it now, Eventually he started shivering and his arms started to burn, and Day realized he'd better swim to shore and get dry. Taking a couple big inhales to get ready, Day felt his arms become really warm. My chakra. That feels a lot better, yeah. Thank you body. I super appreciate it, yeah. Then, judging himself to be prepared, he put his feet on either side of the rock and leapt up and away from it towards the bank. He landed on his hands, his chakra uncoiling into the water. He took no damage from the flexible surface, but was still dazed for several seconds. What the? Didera sat up, realizing as he did so that he was actually sitting on the surface of the water. He held his arms up, but lowered them slowly some seconds later as he realized he was not going to fall through. He paid careful attention and realized that his chakra was now up to something in the parts of his body that were touching the water. FML. This couldn't have happened before. Didera opened his mouth and screamed, his voice echoing through the trees. It actually felt really good. Not trusting this miraculous strengthening of the water's surface to continue if he put more pressure on it, Day spread himself out and crawled across the water toward the bank. He panted, shivering and gasping as a breeze blew across him. Suddenly tired, he sat up. Wasn't being tired when you were cold a bad sign or something? He forced himself to his feet and wandered back to the water's edge. At first he had no idea why. What are you doing, feet? I decided I hate water, right? But still he stood there, leaning against a tree and trying not to fall down or start crying. He blinked once, twice. It was after his vision clouded over and he rubbed his eyes with his sleeve, then opened them again that he realized what he was looking at. A streak of light-colored earth, smooth and gray under the water a foot in front of him. Didera smiled just a touch hysterically. I really hate water. And still he stepped forward and sat reaching into the waterlogged ground.